So it tells us something about change. Easy in the head, hard on the heart. All of you know that now. All of us who are in this process of Area Faith Community know that. It makes perfect sense what the diocese is proposing for us to do. To work together, to marshal our resources, to share our resources, to proclaim the gospel, to do the ministry the best way we know as larger groups. Until we say, oh, by the way, we're going to have a new arrangement of how our pastors work. And that's like, oh, no, wait a minute. Wait a minute, that's not fair. How come, what? And we get all fearful and all nervous inside, and our tummy goes, you know. And I'm just talking about the priests. I'm not talking about the people yet, you know. And so we get all that nervous stuff. And so change in the head is easy. The idea of change is easy. Changing in our heart is a little bit harder. And doing it is harder than we think. Okay, so that's our story moral, just kind of to get us thinking away. If you want to move back to where you were, go ahead and do that while I get my notes ready. And then we'll continue on.
I don't care.
Well, this, the first group, I will tell you, this is the absolute first group that this has happened in. Every other time I've ever done this, including the 2 other times I did it this year, every single person in the whole history of working with this has always moved back to where they belong. Has always moved back to where they started. So this is an interesting thing for me because it's always happened before that people go back. But you didn't all just say, well, no, nobody moved. But you kind of said, well, is it okay if I stay? Is it okay if I'm in your space? But all the other groups that ever worked on with this process, they've always gone back to where they started. And so that's the third lesson of the story. Number 1, change is going to happen for us. Number 2, change in the head is easy. Change in the heart is hard. Number 3, as soon as we get the chance to change back, we will. We will. If you get the choice. You say, well, it's fine the way it was. You all know that we all come from small towns, right? I grew up in a small town. You all grew up in small towns. These are not teeny towns that we live in, but they're not, Minneapolis. When you go to meetings in your parish, does anybody ever say, we never did it that way? Does that ever come up in a meeting? Never. Do you know the second half of that thing that nobody ever says? What's the second half of that? We've never done it that way before. What's the second half of that statement? And everyone in the room understands, but nobody says. Never. The second half is, we've never done it that way before, and we're not doing it that way now.
Oh.
Right? Pretty much. I mean, I'm the same way. It's like, that's a new idea. We don't like those. We want the tried and true. We want to do what works. So I wanted to, one of the reasons that I wanted us to go through this process was that it is just a little teeny thing that helps you touch into how you're going to feel and think about this big process in the way that we pray that's going to happen. So we talk about, the first thing I just want to talk to you about and have you recognize is that change is hard. Change is difficult. It's good in theory. It's hard in practice. And the more used to something we are, the harder it is to change. The more used to something we are, the harder it is to change. And the closer it is to something that's important to us, the closer it is to something that we hold as a treasure, the closer it seems like a disaster to change it. That's just a normal human reaction to change for the most part. Unless you are extremely flexible, any kind of change is kind of hard. It's difficult to try to change the time that you wake up in the morning. It's one of the things that with my job is that my mass times are different at different mornings. I just get up at 5 o'clock every day. Because it's just too hard to reset the alarm and then reteach your body. No, you can sleep till 6:30 today. You can get up at, it's just like, no, I'll just get up. That's just kind of how we do it. So in the closing, more important it is to us, the harder it is to change. My nieces and nephews. All of my life, every Christmas except one, I have spent at my father and mother's house. Not just my father's there, but Every year of my life, I've been there for Christmas Day. Every year. We do the same thing all the time. My father is now 87. He was 86 last Christmas. In February, he just turned 87. So last Christmas, 86. Our house was small when we were growing up, and there were 9 of us. And now that there's 22 or 23 or 24, depending on the year of us, it's even smaller. And my father, who never liked children. He had 7 of us, but he liked us, he loved us. He just didn't like what teenagers did. He didn't like what kids, the in and out, bring friends over, telephone calls, used to bug the heck out of him. Noise. He raised orderly, at least in the house, children. And now that he's 87, he likes all those things less, and then you put all of my brothers and sisters. I'm the one who talks the least of all of them. So you can imagine what our house is like that day. And we all can talk and listen at the same time. The only one who can't anymore is my dad. It's just too close by to and so we were saying, well, maybe it would be better if we moved Christmas to somebody else's house. Like we came to Glencoe, and we could use the church for dinner, and then we could all sit down instead of grabbing a chair here, grabbing a chair there, standing up to eat. We could all sit at a table for once. And so we were talking about that and talking about how my dad would get there and all those kind of things, My nieces and nephews all rose up as one, all 12 of them, and just said, we're not coming if you move. I said, well, they said, no, Christmas is at Grandpa's house. That's what we do. The closer it is to our heart, the less you're going to want to change it. And the more it's going to seem like a disaster if you do change it. So then the question becomes, what's our relationship to these prayers that we pray at Mass every single week? And for some of you here, more than once a week, daily, or 2 or 3 or 4 times a week the last 40 years. What's our relationship to those prayers? For me, at the age I am, this translation really came in 1973. So I was 16. But the translation, that one that came, was pretty close to this one. But this translation is really, within my memory, it's the prayers that I've always prayed. Every time I go to Mass, I have done these prayers. And then what does it all get tied up with? I made my first communion with these prayers. I made my first reconciliation with these prayers. I was confirmed with these prayers. I was ordained a deacon with these prayers. I was ordained a priest with these prayers. I did my first Mass, the first time I celebrated Mass as a priest, with these prayers. I buried my mother with these prayers. I buried my grandmothers with these prayers. I celebrated the weddings of my brothers and my sisters with these prayers. That's a lot of stuff that's close to my heart and important to me. And so then the question becomes, as we approach this change, what are you feeling? So I'll just ask you that if anybody feels free, feels comfortable sharing. What are you thinking about these changes that are coming? If you've thought about it at all. That's okay if you haven't too. I know you don't get paid to think about it like I do. What are your feelings about the changes that are coming? What like at your gut, what are you saying?
Well, that comfort zone. I'm comfortable not using a missal at church, and everything is, we can just know it.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, actually, because I started years and years ago with Latin Masses, and then developed into English, and now this is more modern, the same as all the different conveniences that I have now that I didn't have when I was, say, a teenager or a young married woman.
Okay.
So I'm looking forward to this
Good.
change. It's
Good.
hopefully more modern.
Okay. Anybody else? Tim?
Lonnie.
Sorry. Tim's your brother.
Yep. I guess I'm wondering, what are the values about why, what we're kind of pushing for? If it were going back to maybe some of the Greek or something to get closer to Jesus or the early church, that would make more sense to me than, I guess, another translation of the Latin.
Okay. Anybody else?
It felt like when I read through the booklet that that's what they were trying to search towards to get closer to that translation. And it sounded like the changes were going to further enhance the experience and that biblical closeness. So I look forward to it.
Okay. Well, some common reactions that I've heard in discussion and that I've heard it written about too. One is we can be defensive about it, and it's what's wrong with it? What's wrong with it? You know, the same thing like when we write something and you hand it in and the teacher gives it back to you with all red marks. It's like, you didn't see my creativity. You just noticed that I don't have the comma in the right place. But we can get defensive about it. What's wrong with it? Why don't we just leave it alone? Okay. The resentful, resistant kind of reaction to this, like if it's not broke, why are we fixing it? You know, if it worked all these years, why all of a sudden doesn't it work? For some people, it can seem like we're in retreat from some important things to them. It can feel like we're retreating from being in the modern world. It can seem like we're retreating from some changes that are important in the church. Like some people fear that this is like, it's just the camel's nose in the tent, it's the foot in the door, pretty soon we'll be back to Latin Mass. That's some people's feeling. Okay? And so there's all of those feelings, and then there's the positive feelings. They say, well, you know, for Father Patrick and I think one of the things is just nervous. You know, I've done Mass for so many years without my nose in the book, and now for a long time, it's going to take me a while to not have my nose in the book. You know, so it's the comfortability thing. It's like an old shoe.
I think for a while we're going to hear mumble and jumble from the congregation.
Oh, yeah.
We're
Yes.
afraid to know what anybody's saying.
Oh, okay. And so that's part of our relationship to all of this. Okay? So then we say, well, what was their intention? What they're doing? The first thing to say is that we have new words, but it's the same Mass. So one of the things that we have to remember as we go through this change is that we're not changing what we believe. We're not changing anything what we believe or teach about the Eucharist. That's not changing at all. We still believe the same thing. So we're changing some of the words we pray, but we're celebrating the same mystery of God's saving power. What we believe isn't changing at all. The hope of the new translation is that our prayer is going to more clearly express and more deeply convey what we believe. That these new words will help us to say more clearly, more feelingly, and with more depth what we believe. There is an old Latin phrase, lex orandi, lex credendi. The law of prayer is the law of belief. A better way of translating that into English is that what we believe, we pray. And what we pray, we believe. And so it is trying to be, in some ways, precise about what we pray because it shapes what I believe. It makes a difference in what I believe. And so what are some of the things that they're trying to do with this new translation? The first thing is to say is that we are trying to develop a language of prayer. A language that is set apart from our ordinary every language, not to be stuffy, but to say that the language that we use here is special. So, I'm not having fallen in love and gotten married. There are some ways that you speak to each other as couples, I would suspect, that you don't talk to other people that way. Well, at least I hope you don't, because it's not good for your marriage, or the way that we talk to babies. There's a special, especially some people, it's like, we have special language for special occasions. And so when you go to court, for example, there is a whole set of things that people say, and how they say it makes a difference. And so what we're trying to say is we're trying to create a language of prayer that is set apart from ordinary, not completely distinct or separated from, but somehow set apart. That in its basis is what holy means. Holy means that it's set apart. And so we take these words and this way of speaking to set it apart. To set it apart as our language of prayer. And so one way of talking about it is you take a look at professional, like a doctor.